It was the early morning of December 11th, 1978. New York City was trapped in a freezing winter. At JFK International Airport, the world was mostly asleep, except for the cargo terminals. Inside the Lufthansa Airlines building, the air was quiet. Security guards were sipping coffee, waiting for the sun to come up. They had no idea that at that very second, a black Ford Econoline van was idling in the shadows, just outside the fence. Inside that van were 6 men wearing dark clothing and ski masks. They weren't just random thieves. They were professionals. They had been watching this terminal for months. They knew when the guards changed shifts. They knew which doors were left unlocked. Most importantly, they knew exactly what was inside the vault. The men cut the chain link fence and moved like ghosts toward the building. They didn't yell. They didn't crash through the doors. They entered quietly. The lead robber walked up to the main security desk. He didn't pull a trigger. Instead, he pulled out a piece of paper. He handed it to the guard. On that paper was the guard's home address, his wife's name, and the names of his children. The message was clear. If you fight us, your family pays the price. The guard didn't move. He didn't reach for the alarm. He did exactly what he was told. The leader of the crew was a man named Jimmy Burke. Jimmy was a high-level associate for the Lucchese crime family. He was a man who lived by a simple rule. If you have a secret, keep it. If you have an enemy, remove them. Jimmy had heard a rumour from an airport worker that millions of dollars in untraceable cash arrived from West Germany once a month. This was money used by American tourists and soldiers. And because it was used cash, the serial numbers weren't recorded. It was a ghost fortune. The robbers forced the guards to lead them to the high security vault. The heavy steel door was thick and cold. When the lock finally clicked and the door swung open, even the hardened criminals were stunned. Their flashlights cut through the darkness and hit stacks of $100 bills, piled nearly 4 feet high. There were also crates of gold jewellery and diamonds. They began a brutal, physical race against the clock. Each bag of money weighed nearly 100 pounds. They had to haul these bags across the concrete floor and heave them into the back of the van. The weight was so great that the van began to sink on its suspension. They worked for exactly 64 minutes. They were stealing over $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewellery. In today's money, that is over $25 million. As they pulled away from the terminal, not a single shot had been fired. It was, for that 1 hour, the perfect crime. Jimmy Burke's plan for the getaway was simple. The van was the biggest piece of evidence. It had to disappear immediately. He gave the job to a man named Parnell Stacks Edwards. Stacks was a small-time criminal and a blues musician. His only job was to drive the van to a scrapyard in New Jersey, where it would be crushed into a cube of scrap metal. But Stacks was a man of bad habits. After the adrenaline of the robbery, he was exhausted. Instead of driving to New Jersey, he decided to stop at his girlfriend's apartment in a busy part of Brooklyn. He figured he would sleep for a few hours and then finish the job. He parked the black van in a no parking zone right on the street. The next morning, New York police officers were out writing tickets. They saw the van. They looked through the window and saw a piece of a black ski mask and a muddy boot print on the floor. When they ran the plates, they realised this was the vehicle used in the biggest heist in New York history. By the time the sun went down that day, the FBI had the van. Inside, they found Stack's fingerprints on the steering wheel. The perfect crime had just left a clear trail straight to the crew. When Jimmy Burke heard that the van had been found, he didn't panic. He became cold. He knew the FBI would find Stacks, and he knew that if Stacks was caught, he would talk to avoid a life sentence. Jimmy decided that the only way to keep the money was to make sure no one could tell the story. This was the beginning of what the papers called the Lufthansa Purge. Stacks Edwards was the first to go. He was found in his apartment just days after the heist. But Jimmy didn't stop there. He began to look at the rest of his crew. He saw them as liabilities. He saw them as people who might get drunk and brag about their new wealth. Over the next several months, the men who pulled off the greatest heist in history began to vanish. One was found inside a refrigerated meat truck, frozen solid. Another was found in a dumpster. 2 more were found in the trunk of a car that had been crushed at a junkyard. Jimmy was systematically erasing every person who had been inside that vault with him. He was the only one left who knew where the money was, and he intended to keep it that way. The FBI spent years investigating the Lufthansa heist. They dug up basements. They checked secret bank accounts. They followed every lead across the country. But they faced a wall of silence. The people who could have testified were all dead, and the people who were still alive were too terrified to speak. Jimmy Burke eventually went to prison, but not for the heist. He was convicted of a different crime and died behind bars in 1996. Even on his deathbed, he never told a soul where the $5 million in cash went. To this very day, not a single dollar of that money has ever been found. It is one of the greatest missing treasures in the world. The Lufthansa heist remains a legend because it shows the dark truth of the criminal world. The robbery itself was easy. The hard part was the greed and the paranoia that came after. A group of men walked into a vault and became millionaires for a single night. But by the end of the year, almost all of them were in the ground. The money is still out there somewhere, buried or hidden. A silent reminder of a crime that everyone paid for with their lives.